My name is Natasha, and I have a cat, gray like morning fog, with a white patch on his chest. His name is Graf, though he's no aristocrat. He loves simple food, shoe boxes, and the way radiators turn on in early autumn. He knows more about me than anyone else. Maybe because he doesn't argue and never asks, why? He just sits nearby, a heavy, warm ball, and watches while I talk. And then he sleeps on my side of the bed like a seal. Igor and I lived together for 4 years. He's a proper man, can melt cheese on toast so it bubbles exactly in the middle. He sorts the trash and reads instructions without skipping a line. Sometimes I thought he should have been born in a time when the world still obeyed linear logic. You open a door, you enter, you turn off the light, it's dark. I was about something else, chance turns, unforeseen stops, how the wind changes direction. We were decent, steady, normal. And quiet, sometimes too quiet. We got the cat by accident. I picked him up off the stoop in late November, when he was sneezing and sticking to my boots. Igor was against it, against the current, against the fur, against wet paw prints on the kitchen tiles. But he gave in. Graf immediately loved windows and boxes, and he loved me, from the first glance, it seemed. He followed me from room to room like a pale shadow, and at night he lay on my feet. Igor laughed that it was a feline conspiracy, and went to sleep against the wall. I started going to ceramics in the spring, Wednesdays at 6. I wanted to get my fingers dirty with clay, wrap them around something alive and warm that resisted, but yielded. The studio always smelled of damp earth and iron. We sat at the wheels like pilots in their cockpits, making bowls as crooked as subway maps. That's where I met Andrei. He joked that clay is like memory, everything you ever did to it will resurface in the firing. And he laughed without looking. On his right hand there was a thin white shirt of skin, a long-heeled
Daha
scar.
yüksek seviyeli bir yelek
He
bulalım.
didn't ask questions he didn't want answered. Being near him made me feel light, as if I were 15 again in the school workshop where nothing needed explaining, just breathing and spinning. We made our first cup together, the 4 of us, me, him, the wheel, and the shadow from the lamp. We didn't touch, only once our fingers met on the clay, and it flinched. I came home late that evening. Graf was sitting by the door like a ticket inspector. He tilted his head and sniffed. Then he stood on his hind legs, pressed his nose into my palm, and sneezed. I laughed and said, "Don't be jealous." He puffed up like dough and went to the kitchen to demand dinner. Igor was already asleep on the couch, his phone playing the sound of rain. That's when it began. Not with a kiss, not with hands on a waist, not with a stranger's smell on the pillow. It began with my small disappearances. With Wednesday at 6, and I had to stay late, the instructor asked me to lock up the studio. It began with messages about glazing that turned into sudden conversations about where the best shawarma in town was, why parents call their adult children by diminutives, and how to live when you're always pretending you've got it together. Graf read me like a book.
Muhafız duvar seni
On the
koruyabilir.
windowsill and tracked every smile, every pause. If I delayed my reply, he waited. If the phone buzzed too loud, he threw me a look that said everything. And sometimes he seemed to understand before I did where it was all going. At night he came and curled into my knees and revved his purring engine so loudly I couldn't hear my own thoughts. It saved me, for an hour at least. I spent a long time convincing myself it was just friendship. That a grown woman has a right to be listened to. That I needed someone who wouldn't fall asleep halfway through my sentence. Igor was tired. In the mornings he had reports, in the evenings,
Zırh kırıldı.
serials with even
Tamir
frames
edilmesi
where all
gerek.
problems are solved in 42 minutes. He loved me on a schedule. I was like a city river, now wider, now narrower, now murky, now bright. I wanted someone to come to my bank and not be afraid to get their sneakers wet. The first time Andrei and I kissed was among the shelves with glazes. It was always cool there, as if the room itself protected the silence so the jars wouldn't clink like glasses. It happened as naturally as putting a mug on the table and forgetting about it. The next day I couldn't look at myself in the mirror. Graf sat on the edge of the sink and stared at me with a round, unblinking gaze. I asked, "Well?" He was silent. Then he sat closer and nudged my chin. It felt like a seal, a stamp. Yes, it happened. From that day I lived on a trembling bridge connecting two banks. On one, my familiar life, our own cups, tidy towels, Igor running a finger along the counter to check for crumbs. On the other, the studio, Andrei laughing, clay under my nails, paint-smeared jeans. I walked the bridge and each time thought, today I'll fall. But the bridge held. Igor wasn't a fool. He noticed my disappearances, the new cups at home that were clearly store-bought, as he said.
Silahı artık geliştirebilirsin.
One day he
Gücünü
asked,
artırmak
"Are
için
you
dokun."
happy?" I said, "I'm tired." It was more honest and simpler. He nodded like a condemned man and tidied the bathroom so I wouldn't slip on the wet floor. Graf was the only one I told everything to. At night, when Igor went off to fish in the suburbs, we lay on the couch. I spoke and the cat listened. Quietly, and he knows how. What I'd been holding inside poured out of me. The fear of being bad, the tight sweetness of someone else's voice, the shame that I smiled not at home but on someone else's staircase that smelled of damp rag and curry. The cat rubbed against my wrist as if he knew I needed something that didn't ask moral questions. When it truly happened, it wasn't rushed or craved. But I won't tell you how it happened. I'll only say this. In that moment I understood that no cup can be mended if it's cracked along the living line. Afterward, there was a lot of silence. And a lot of water. I washed my hands too long. I laundered the sheets as if fabric could forget. Graf sat on the washing machine and watched the drum like a hypnotherapist. One day, closer to summer, Igor came into the kitchen and said, "I don't want to guess anymore." There was no anger in his voice. Only some tired masculine breathing. And I understood, it was time to speak. The words started like a train, heavy, dull, and then they moved. I said what the walls had long known, about Imprints, about the laughter that saved me, about how on Wednesdays at 6 I chose myself, not the schedule. He listened. Then he said, "I can't have the two of you along with me." It sounded strange, as if Graf were the third participant in the negotiations. We decided he'd move to his brother's for a couple of weeks. And that we'd stay away from impulsive decisions. I was left with the cat and the empty glasses on the table. In the evening, Graf came and lay on his back. I laughed through tears. He looked like a little gray seal. And I thought that all my life I'd been saved by the funny in the unfunniest moments. With Andrei it wasn't any easier. He wasn't a villain. He didn't promise me oceans or build illusions. He spoke simply, "I'm here, as long as you can." And I increasingly realized I could, poorly. That my ability to be here could be measured by the cat's purr and the number of neatly folded towels in the cupboard. In the end, even clay, if you give it too much water, falls apart. One day I brought home an underfired vase from the studio. On it was the print of my thumb, an accidental dent. I put it on the windowsill. In the morning the sun lay right on that dent. I looked and thought how much it was like us, any effort, any touch leaves a mark. And it doesn't matter whether the vase is beautiful or awkwardly bent. What matters is whose mark it is, and whether you're ready to live with it. A week later Igor came back to collect his things. We sat in the kitchen like people who suspect their trips will end at different stations. He said, "I love you, but I don't know how now." And I answered, "Me too." And that, too, wasn't about love, but about not knowing. We hugged. No hysterics, no big lines. Graf came over, got lost between our legs, and meowed, pitiful and funny. Igor stroked him between the ears. "Look after her," he told the cat. Graf looked serious and blinked. As if to say, yes. When the door closed behind Igor, I sat on the hallway floor and counted the neighbors' steps on the stairs. Then I got up, went to the kitchen, and poured food for Graf. He buried his face in the bowl and ate with a sound like it was the day's most important act. I boiled myself pasta, set that underfired vase in the center of the table, and watched the evening fall on it. Andrei and I kept seeing each other for a while. He laughed, touched my elbow, said I was getting better at technique. I felt I wasn't getting better at anything. On a rainy day I said I didn't want to anymore. He nodded, as if it was the conclusion we'd been heading toward. We stood by the studio. The wind tugged at the flags on the cafe next door. He said, "Take care of yourself." And, strangely, I didn't hear goodbye in those words, but live. Sometimes they're the same. The apartment became bigger. It had echo, simple, childlike. I arranged things on new shelves. Took the Velcro off the window screens. I wanted the air to come in freely. Graf claimed a new spot, on my half of the pillow. In the mornings he stretched out happily and looked at me like someone who understands everything about you. And in those calm, free morning minutes it was clear to me, I'm not a hero and not a villain. I'm a person who caused pain. To myself, to others. And still wants to live. Sometimes, on Wednesdays at 6, I still go to the studio. The smell of clay doesn't accuse. It simply is. Sometimes I linger at the window and watch people on the street holding onto each other, carrying bags, laughing, arguing. And I think that fidelity isn't only about people. It's about being faithful to the self you once dreamed of being. I want to be honest. Not perfectly, not always, but more often than not. In the evenings Graf brings me his little mouse ball and lays it on the rug like an offering. He stubbornly teaches me the simple things. If you love, bring it. If you miss, sit nearby. If you're guilty, don't hide under the bed. Come out and rub against someone's hand. Cats know that life is a chain of short and long sleeps, between which you do the best you can. One day a friend came over. We drank tea from my crooked cups. She asked, "Do you regret it?"
Kill.
I looked at the lamp, at the dust in its warm circle, at the cat who had found the sunniest patch on the carpet and melted into it. And I said, I don't know. I'm learning. It was the truth. At night, when the city grew soft and quiet, I opened the window. The air came in like someone unsure they were expected. Graf settled on my chest, heavy and calm. I listened to his purring. It's the most honest sound in the world. And I thought that if forgiveness exists in this world, maybe it sounds like that, even, warm, wordless. And if faith exists, it's about believing that tomorrow you can be a tiny bit better. Not for anyone else. For yourself. And for that gray, happy creature that comes every morning and says without words, "Well then, shall we live?"